Namaste, viewers. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA and Jaipur Dialogue. Before I begin, let me make my customary request to you to like, subscribe, support our channel, press the bell icon, and listen for the alert. Support us, give us the feedback that makes us better. Today, I wanted to talk about America in decline. Is America in decline? There is no news which is a good news these days. Some president had said in the past that we want to change America fundamentally. Change is painful. Changing America fundamentally towards what? These are the questions that people are asking now. And we Indian community, we are especially hit hard. We are being under attack for one reason or the other, mostly cooked up, false, and unsubstantiated, no data. But this 3 million or odd NRIs, Indian Americans, are the target of an attack which is rather vicious. And as if we are the root cause of all problems in America. To discuss this issue today, I have great pleasure in welcoming two very educated, strong people with strong minds who are willing to talk. Dr. Anurag Mairal, professor in Stanford University, and Dr. Nathan Punwani. He also is part of the US-India relationship PAC. So welcome to the show. Today is Sunday. Let's get going. So Dr. Anurag Mairal, you have been, by your self-admission, you said you awakened to the impending crisis that is going on against Indian Americans in this part, specifically Hindus. Talking about American decline in juxtaposition to that, why are we, the people, the Indian Americans, victims of such vicious attacks? And it seems our response to those vicious attacks is rather sporadic. One institution here, one institution there. But there is a collective anger against that, and response is happening, but it's not strong enough. Your thoughts?
Namaste, Vibhuti Jha, and thank you so much for having me on the show. You're absolutely right. I mean, I'm late to the waking up scene, if you will, as far as Indian American societal issues are concerned. I've been in healthcare and global health for a fairly long time, and I've been in this country for 30 years. Longer than I lived in India. Honestly, I didn't really see this coming, what's happening right now. It has been quite a shock culturally, spiritually, in terms of just the overall sense of belonging and being. It has been quite shocking to see the kind of attacks. And I feel a large part of this is really the kind of divisive politics that we see in the US. And US is not the only country where we are seeing it, but because we are the largest the oldest democracy, and also the richest country in the world, what happens here does get a lot more attention. So I think it's the identity politics, in my opinion, that has led us to this. There's a phrase that he used, melting pot. Earlier, versus multiculturalism. I've been thinking about that phrase quite a bit last few months. When I first came to this country, melting pot was the phrase that was being used, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Now that I have three kids who are at different ages, who are Indian Americans, who are born Americans of Indian heritage, I wonder about that, and I wonder if this phrase multiculturalism, which tends to give specific identity to each subgroup and subgroup within subgroup, if that that has something to do with where we have arrived, where every group tends to want a piece for themselves. So that's kind of part of the challenge as well. And then the last thing I would say is that Indian Americans have really arrived in terms of economic capacity, in terms of its impact on the society, whether it's social sector or the technology or economic sector or political sector as well. And you naturally become a target. Any group that has an outsized success tends to attract detractors. And if you notice, most of the folks that are trying to pull Indian Americans down are the ones who are way down on the success totem pole, if you will. And it's unfortunate that those groups are down there. We need to find a way to help them all. But it's some of it is driven by a sense of wrong that they see in one small community. We are 1% of the American population, and we contribute so much more to the economic and political and social dialogue in the country, and that isn't very welcome by some of these groups.
Thank you, Dr. Punwani. Taking the cue from the multiculturalism and melting pot, I recall at JFK, I was flying to India, and along in the passenger check-in queue, there was a Pakistani lady who was standing right behind me, and we started talking. And this is several years ago. And she made a very interesting statement. She was a PhD scholar in Columbia University, and she said, the experiment of multiculturalism in America has failed. And this was many years ago, over 10 years ago, has failed. Talking about melting pot, how do we fit in? Do you think the multiculturalism has failed and melting pot no longer exists? Because you are right, Anurag, you mentioned about the identity politics. And I see this as a Republican candidate for assembly last year, is the Democratic Party systematically plays divisive politics incessantly. And this is my reading, and I could be wrong. Your thoughts on that? Are we part of the multicultural experiment, melting pot? Where is it going?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me this Sunday morning. I think, a good cooking analogy, as I'm exploring cooking for the first time, we talk about a melting pot, right? So one of the things that you had many times when you're making a dish, you're putting water and oil together, right? And what ends up happening, or if you put some ghee in there, things separate out. So I think what you're seeing is a reassertion of different cultural identities within that melting pot. And I think what's driving this is this kind of grievance culture. I think now it suddenly becomes that the more grievances you have, that is positively correlated to somehow my situation is more important than your situation. And I think as a result, we don't, as Indian Americans with a very high socioeconomic heft, we're going to be lower on that totem pole of grievance. And I think a case in point is a fellow Indian American of our own, not exactly, I think, our crowd's favorite, but Hassan Minhaj. I think some of you may know, but he's a comedian, and the New Yorker just did an expose that showed a lot of his comic anecdotes turned out to be completely fabricated. And now he's responding by saying, oh, well, they're emotional truths. So it didn't necessarily have to happen, but because it was my emotional state and that's real, therefore, even if the event didn't happen, it's true. And it's post-truth mentality coupled with grievance that now is able to substantiate anything. And now there's no truth or fact anymore. Now it's just that this is my grievance, this is the way I feel, therefore it is the truth. And it's arbitrary at the end of the day. And it's this kind of distortion of reality that actually paints Indian Americans in a negative light, because as it is, we're doing very, very well, both culturally, academically, economically. We're, high pillars of society. I mean, you look at just the Fortune 500 CEOs, Indian Americans are represented at the upper echelons of Microsoft, Alphabet, Chanel, Starbucks. So these aren't even just outside of the tech world. We're actually breaking out into other sectors of the economy and other sectors of society. And it's a great. But at the end of the day, that limelight is a lightning. Success begets, unfortunately, a lot of scrutiny.
You said it very well. Emotional justification. That's why I could.
Emotional truth.
It's emotional truth. This is very important. The grievance thing, blaming others for your own problems. You become envious of the success of a few around here. But it's very important. You pointed out about the number of CEOs who are of Indian origin breaking through technology and other areas of the world. So, Dr. Mairal, emotional truth. This is very
Yeah.
critical because I know I have, my son used to be a fan of Hassan Minhaj, no more, because he saw through what Dr. Punwani said, that there was emotional lies there, not emotional truth. Lies peddled as truth. He saw through that, no longer watches him. So Hassan Minhaj, if you are watching or if you get to know this, remember, technology has brought about news traveling faster than the speed of lightning, as I often say. So, Dr. Mairal, this is a very important point here. We are the targets, whether we like it or not. We can't wish it away. We have to confront that. And one of the things which I have said, that the caste thing that is going on in your state of California, in Bay Area, where there are hundreds of Indian migrants who have done very well, they have become billionaires, entrepreneurs, job creators, influencing the society, hundreds of CEOs, but not one of them have I read have come out to say that, hey guys, we are where we are because of our performance and merit. We have had no encounter or the privilege coming out of factors that you accuse us of. Why is it so?
Yeah, I think it's in the numbers too. By the way, just about Hassan Minhaj, I still think he's very funny.
He's
It's
funny,
just not
no
truthful.
doubt.
It's not
He's funny.
truthful.
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
So let's give him the
Yes,
credit
he's
for
funny.
Funny to
what he
laugh
did.
at. He's funny to laugh at.
Laugh at. Yes, that's another important word. Funny to laugh at. Correct. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
So I think a lot of it is it's really numbers as well. We are 1% of American society, and as I mentioned earlier, we are a good target because we have risen up. And I think part of the reason of success, the recipe for success, Nathan, as you brought up, you're in cooking, into cooking. It's very much about us, whether we folks that grew up in India and came here as grad students or whatever, or Indian American kids who grew up here. I think they are taught culturally to keep your heads down, work hard, don't focus on anything else, just be very focused on what you're supposed to be doing. And I think it's drilled into us culturally. And scientific activity, technology activity, economic activity, whatever it is that we are doing, I think we are starting to venture out, we are starting to speak up. And that also brings a lot of it becomes a lightning rod. Oh, they're speaking up. The moment you start becoming more assertive, you also become target of attacks. Being a model minority, if you're quiet and you are you're keeping your heads down and just quietly taking whatever is coming your way, you tend not to get as many brickbats. So I think it's just a small percentage of the population that we represent. We are not a big numerical force in terms of the political privilege or political voter base, if you will. So that plus this cultural upbringing that Indian Americans have, that you just got to do your job and let the chips fall there where they may. It prevents us from really speaking up. It's like, I've had community members say to me, I'm not sure it's my place to speak. And my question to them is, are you worried about what it'll do to your kids? If you are, which I am, very worried about what it does to my kids. Very, very worried about what it does to my mentees, my students who are Indian Americans. And it's something that we all must worry about. And that's my question to all parents. If you don't worry, if you're not worried about what it does to you, you should definitely worry about what it does to your kids.
That's very powerful. And I will make a mention here, which I've said many times in my show, that when I came to this country way back in 91, a senator once told me that, a powerful politician, he told me, we love you Indians as immigrants to this country. You are hardworking, you are professionals, you are educated, you have family values, you take care of your children, you are not a law and order problem anywhere in the world as an immigrant community, and you are in the highest income bracket, and you ask for nothing. Dr. Punwani, you ask for nothing, which is Dr. Mairal was referring to. Even if you were not to ask for anything for yourself, now the time has come in the 2023 now, when we have to ask for ourselves for exactly the group of people Dr. Mairal is talking about is our children. They will become the future targets, willingly or not. So there is a very interesting example. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a fabulous young lady who became a Christian after joining the medical college. And her roommate convinced her to become a Christian, and how she manipulated her parents to sponsor and pay for various exams and tests without totally violating her parents' wish to return to the fold. This is a challenge which people are facing, that young people will say, who wants to bear the stigma of caste? Let me become a Christian or a Muslim or change my religion to whatever faith. That's an individual decision, but driven by the factor of this kind. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, actually, just curious, was that story, is that someone who was born in India, raised in India?
Born here.
Born here.
Yeah.
I mean, it shows kind of that, that kind of a cultural isolation that can take
Yes.
place whenever we get stigmatized on the caste, and it's coupled by the fact that a lot of the textbooks, for example, California, they present distortionary information about our community in just the history books. You can look at the AP World History textbooks from 2018, and they say that we, worship cows. We don't believe in egalitarianism. And then they contrast with Islam in the same table, saying that Muslims believe in more social reform. So, and it kind of makes us look very bad at it from that angle. So, I think that's why it's very important that, I think, parents need to speak up. I think, there's a lot of talk about parents' rights and education. And, I think that's very important, is instilling those cultural values into the next generation. It's not all about getting your kid into Harvard or Stanford. It's also about actually making them have a sense of culture, a better sense of cultural rootfulness as opposed to rootlessness. And I think that's something that you're going to actually see, with like the coming generation, is that they're going to be more culturally rootless if they're not brought into kind of our fold and our way of life.
Can I speak to that, Vibhuti Ji?
Yes, please do that. I was going to ask you about the cultural rootlessness.
Yes.
How does a parent like you, a parent like me, and hundreds of others address this element of cultural rootlessness?
Yeah, that's such an important point, and I want to really delve into that just a little bit, because often it's considered to be, this identity politics that we talked about earlier. I think there's a clear differentiation between what Dr. Punwani was talking about and that cultural politics that we see. I think having an identity, understanding who you are as people, as community, and being comfortable in that, being rooted in that, is a wonderful thing. It brings a lot of value to the society. It brings a lot of value to yourself, because now you're clear who you are, but it also brings a lot of value to the people around you. You are able to contribute meaningfully to the discourse, in a sort of a more positive manner. And that's different from the identity politics, where you basically take your identity as a cudgel and you beat the rest of the society with it. That's not what we are talking about. And that's something that I've thought about a little bit. My older two who are college age, one of them is going on to do his PhD now, and I did not spend as much time focusing on cultural training. I took them to Indian and American events. We did our Ganesh Aarti and all of that, but I did not spend the time to really walk them through the stories that I heard as a kid. And that came naturally to me because I grew up in India, but these kids were growing up in this isolated environment where there are not that many like them around them, except for places like the US, of California, for example. But I think that deep immersion in the culture, in some ways, parents have to do it. And I learned from my mistakes of the first two, and then I've tried to do that better with my third one. And I already see the benefit. The third one is a lot more comfortable in his own skin. He's engaging with he's still very young, but he's engaging with his peers a lot more proactively comfortable with his cultural upbringing. And I suspect when he grows up, he becomes an adult, the kinds of conversations he's going to have with others is going to come from those roots, but also going to be a positive, optimistic view of that future rather than the identity politics that we are drilling into our kids so far. I think that's negative. Identity politics is negative. Cultural rootedness is positive. There's a very clear differentiation in those two.
Yeah. Being aware of yourself culturally is important. What we want to really underscore here is that using your culture to extract your pound of flesh at the political bargaining table, that's wrong.
Yeah. But the point is, that brings me to the topic here about America in decline. You look around everywhere, it's becoming a challenge. But before we go to the America in decline scenario, which is my thought process, because things are not looking good for America right now, Vivek Ramaswamy, if you looked at the newspaper, he's become a phenomenon. From 0 to 11%, virtually tied on the second spot. He is making waves. And he is talking about uprooting and bringing about changes which are critical to America going forward. I don't believe that America is meeting its Waterloo, so to say. I believe that America has a lot more to offer, but in a think tank, in a study group, more than 12 years ago, when people talked about the decline of America, I said America will not decline. It's 1/4 the population of India, juxtaposing the data, and 3 times larger in size, with reasonably great infrastructure in place and institutions in place. The only thing that can hurt, and it is a resource-rich country, it's not a one-product country or anything like that. So it is a very strong base. So America will not face a decline unless the politicians of this country clash in such a manner that they become arrogant in their dealings with the world around us. And that's the situation I see America going through right now. How do you rate that scenario today, that Vivek Ramaswamy is now talking about doing away with H-1B visa altogether? He calls it an indentured servitude. Your thoughts on this, Nathan?
So, I think he's certainly a phenomenon. I think it's important to keep in mind that while he might be doing well in national polls, if you look at state level polls when it comes to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, he's actually polling more like 5%, and he's probably 4th in the pack. So, I think it's great that he's helping to change the discourse and everything. And I think, the reason why some of that message is starting to at least percolate is because I think there is a hunger in this country for a better sense of cultural rootfulness, as he likes to kind of expound on. And then in addition, it's this backlash against kind of grievance culture and grievance hierarchy. And one thing, I think that's like a very good, very illustrative example is actually when Vivek Ramaswamy was with Don Lemon. I actually happen to disagree with Vivek Ramaswamy on his actual point. But Don Lemon basically told Vivek Ramaswamy, what ethnicity are you again? What do you know? And Vivek Ramaswamy said, well, look, we should be able to have a debate without me or you taking this down, degenerating the debate to the level of I know more than you because I'm X ethnic group or XY religious group, right? So I think that's where you're actually seeing him helping to transform the discourse for the better. And I think, when it comes to the H-1B visa, he's been calling for a broader immigration reform that reflects more merit. And, we'll see if that resonates with the broader population. But I think his message is at least helping to change the discourse. And, I wish him the best of luck. It's going to be a tough uphill road for him. But, I think he's the kind of CEO that I want to speak out against some of this victimhood and that kind of fake narrative.
You are so right. I'll tell you what, 1991, when I came here, America being America, who will not get smitten by America or struck by the power of America? So I was like that. And I have been hearing since then, war on drugs, immigration, comprehensive immigration reform, which has not yet happened. And I think you are right about that assessment of yours, Nathan, that people are tired and hungry for an authentic change happening. And look at what is happening on the immigration front in the country. I mean, New York, San Francisco, the cities and states that have declared themselves as sanctuary cities, they are refusing and they are overburdened with the policy that. So, what's Biden's game plan? Breaking through the border and letting everybody come in, and more than 3 million people have come in, many unwanted people as well. So, Dr. Mairal, the question here is, people are hungry. And Vivek Ramaswamy, as I called him, it was a debate, Republican debate was politicians as usual versus Vivek Ramaswamy. And people are now awakening to that fact as well, that these politicians are not doing enough to solve the problem. I just add one more thing. It is not lack of knowledge, wisdom, smarts that we haven't solved the immigration problem yet. People are sick and tired of what has been going on. Your thought on it?
Yeah, first of all, what a phenomenon, Vivek Ramaswamy. There are three things about him that I find really remarkable. By the way, I don't agree with him on many of the policy issues as well, just like Nathan.
You got trashed for one of the tweets that you mentioned, that even though I do not agree with Vivek, people question you, why was that epithet required?
Indeed.
So
indeed.
Go ahead. You have it.
But that's the beauty of this country. I mean, so there are three things I love about it. Number one, I think I'm an ideas person. We need ideas on all sides. I think part of the reason discourse has broken down in our lovely country here is because we have not had dialogue. We have not had conversation. If you notice what I do on Twitter, I engage folks diametrically opposite to me in my views in pretty civil way. And I think that's the point that he's making at a very large stage, that you can have a conversation without talking each other down and without calling each other, giving each other labels. And he's, so that's number one. Number two, he's a tremendous communicator. I mean, if you look at folks speaking on his face and the way he's engaging with them politely, with poise and with logic, to me that's a very welcome sign. I think all politicians can learn from him on that. And then third thing, I would say, which also I'm an evidence-driven person. I think we should make points based on evidence, not based on emotional truth. Is that what is being called? So I think he's very data-driven. His numbers are somewhat solid. I mean, there's some times when he's been questioned, but more often than not, he's using data to make his point. So I think those three are wonderful things. I do want to make one point about America being in decline. I think America is in difficulty, but I don't think long arc of America is not going to be in decline. What I'm seeing with U.S.-India partnership, and I'm really glad that Dr. Punwani is actually engaged in that U.S.-India relationship. I do this through health technology and other mechanisms, but you're looking at more from policy lens. I think this is one of the smartest things that we could have done as Americans to engage with India the way we have. And the G20 success that you see, I suspect it is in large part because President Biden, the United States, has, put its faith in India in bringing global South to the table. Otherwise, the world order that some of the countries, whether it's China, Russia, are the way they see it, it's actually very fractious and sort of disruptive future, where global South would be part of this global North kind of setup. And I don't think that's how we fix world's problems. We need to work together. And the inclusion of African Union and G20 and all of that. So I feel America is making some of these decisions that I think are positive. And I think we are likely going to see our leadership and our continued sort of sustenance as a wonderful country, that's prosperous. It'll probably be ensured through these kind of alliances. I think we do need to fix the political dialogue in the country, and Vivek Ramaswamy brings a very healthy dose, very nice dose of that discourse.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to also to compliment you and your efforts in trying to bring about the, through the medical arena, the technology breakthrough that you are doing. You were part of when Prime Minister visited here during his state visit in New York, you were there to meet with him and present your case along with your colleagues in academic world. Yeah. Share with us in a quick, quick bite as to how did you feel about what was the response of the Prime Minister in that moment? How did you feel about that entire thing? What do you see, whether it is political rhetoric or just a conversation, or there is something substantial happening out there? Dr. Anurag.
I think it's a great question. So for long I've argued that India-US partnership is going to be really critical. It's one of, in my opinion, it's probably the most defining partnership, geopolitical partnership for the next 3 decades, if not more. And the partnership that we see between the US and India, it goes beyond party line. It goes beyond, Republicans and Democrats both believe in that. They see it, and they have invested in it over the last decade plus. What we are seeing on the other side in India now, though, is a political leadership that has come to recognize that the non-aligned movement view that India was taking wasn't really serving India's national interest and India's aspiration. So I personally feel that there's a lot of substance in this conversation, and my meeting with the Prime Minister Modi actually backed that up. The kinds of conversation that we had in those 45 minutes with 7 of us who are presidents of the universities or deans of various top business schools and was very substantive. He was listening. He asked some very specific questions. His call to action was very, very targeted. He talked about not only degrees and formal education, but he also talked about skilling. So he knows that for his 1.4 billion stakeholders that he has in India, he needs not only undergrads, masters, PhDs, advanced degrees, but he also needs a large part of the population that is upskilled using technology, using new approaches, whether it's AI, whether it's e-learning or whatever. And his conversations with us were very driven by his desire to make a difference to his people. And if India does better, we do better here, because India is a major commercial partner for us. It's a major geopolitical partner for us. And I saw, and he was very clear about his ask, and it was clear in his messaging that he sees U.S. as a partner. He sees what India has to offer American partners is an opportunity, and I agree with him on that.
I'm glad I asked that question, and thank you for telling us your experience of 45 minutes that you spent with Prime Minister, along with many other colleagues, deans, and other faculty members. That's awesome to know. If I hadn't asked, I wouldn't have known. This is another element of that. Communication is key. Nathan, I'm coming to you with this. Mm-hmm. India and United States, I do not address India and United States as largest democracy, oldest democracy. I call both of them as the world's 2 most prominent democracies, because people look up to us. And I think that epithet defines the 2 countries much better than I'm the largest, I'm the oldest. Then Prime Minister says India is the mother of all democracies. Then we go into semantics and conversation of that kind. But in this century today, in this year 2023, India and America, I call them the 2 most prominent democracies. And many ways these relationships have been defined. How do you see that growing, given that in all the Democratic Party-run states, you and I are targets? Everything that Modi does in India is a target here. Peculiarly enough, in all the Democrat-run states. How do you explain that? How does it happen?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it's one of those things where, a lot of people on the more left end of the spectrum, they tend to view Modi as this, Hindu majoritarian force, like a culturally authoritarian. So I think in an environment when you're preaching kind of this woke gospel of inclusiveness and tolerance, naturally, that kind of there's going to be a backlash against Prime Minister Modi, even though, I mean, it's not true, but that narrative is going to be, Prime Minister Modi is not going to resonate well in the bluest of bluest parts of New York City, especially where wokeism is gospel, right? So I mean, I think at the end of the day that's what it happens. I think there is a lesson though to learn from actually, believe it or not, China. For nearly a generation, for more than 25 years, we actually glorified China in the United States. To some extent, we still do, and I think one of the reasons why is that you see it grow whenever you see a country gain a lot of economic heft. Suddenly the dialogue around that country actually shifts and it shifts to its favor. So actually despite all of the activism of, for example, Richard Gere during the 90s on Tibet, the persecution of the Falun Gong, nobody in Washington, D.C. wanted to criticize China. Almost nobody. That was like a third rail of American politics, as you did not actually cross the China. For the longest time, none of the U.S. presidents met with the Dalai Lama. So I think as you see India grow, and I mean, India is now probably the fastest growing large economy, clocking in, I think, 7.8% this year. I actually think you're going to see the dialogue, the discourse change around India, around Prime Minister Modi, around Hindutva. You're already seeing in the U.S. media that discourse change. I'll credit a few people, but like Walter Russell Mead from the Wall Street Journal, he's actually reporting on India and reporting it in very glowing terms. And he's saying that no, America needs to engage with, for example, the BJP and the RSS. He says that we have to understand India through its unique cultural lens. We can't, there was, for example, Hindutva, BJP, RSS, they don't have any kind of intellectual heritage with the West. It's organic and grew up out of India. We're going to have to come up with different terms to analyze and understand that ethos. And he's saying that we actually need more of a cultural dialogue. And he's been pushing for example, more U.S.-India foreign exchanges when it comes to both the diplomatic corps, also within the education academia. So I think that's something you're going to see. I think, this is why I think it's so important for India to get the growth trajectory right. I think when you have prosperity, people come to you, and they come to you very nicely. And China did it, India can do it.
About the China comparison, I have, it is a personal journey for me, and I know that because in the West, people always say, oh, China has done this, China has done that. And I said that comparison is very odious, unfair, because you are talking about a developing democratic country with all its chaos, and you are comparing with a totalitarian state where President Xi declared himself the president for life, and nobody had anything to say. Nobody squirmed. No rats squealed either. But if Prime Minister Modi were to declare himself as to following the China model to end the discussion forever, you imagine what the uproar would be, right? So this comparison is wrong, people, when they make India and China comparison. And I always say that to the American businesses and other people, that don't make that mistake. You can't compare apples with watermelon or apples with beef. You can't make that comparison. They are two different entities. So it is very important for us to figure out that when we praise China, that China did that and China did this, hey, nobody had a choice in China. So I will appeal to all Indians to end that comparison with China. Would you just answer one question? Would you be happy if Modi declares himself following Xi's model, Prime Minister for life? The entire world will collapse. So, Dr. Mairal, I will come to you with this other thought here. And that is very important because as we live, we believe, I'm happy to see here that we agree that American decline is more of a misnomer than reality. However, the message that is coming around, wages falling, American companies not able to compete with the world companies, deficits soaring, I mean, we have become an obese country at $33 trillion of debt and $1 trillion in debt servicing of interest payment. Schools are failing. You and I know about this, that the standards have fallen dramatically with STEM education and the standards. Cities have become unsafe. I don't like to go to New York City anymore because, as a friend told me in New York City, you always have to look over your shoulder. And she's an American. She said that Bergdorf Goodman on Fifth Avenue, if I get a phone call, I lean against the wall and then use my phone because I do not know who will attack me. That uncertainty has gripped in the minds of people. How do you see this particular chaos change in America, considering the emotional truth people live in?
I live in San Francisco Bay Area, and every time I go to the city in San Francisco City, I see that too. So I think this is an ailment that is brought about by us ourselves and really the politics. I really put the blame firmly at the feet of our politics. Whether you call it wokeism, ultra progressivism, where it's not geared towards really everybody's upliftment and improvement. It's really about doing this identity politics and sort of taking these really narrow views of what the solution should be to a particular problem. I think they can benefit from a bit of a design thinking course that we teach at Stanford. But coming back to your point, though, how do we shift course? I think the answer is in open discourse, truly honest conversation that is not obfuscated by the kinds of politics that we do today. It's an education, not just in the classroom, but outside of classroom. So that's a second piece I see. And third is, and I'm going to use this term, which some may or may not like or understand, decolonization. I think we have far too long, we had viewed the rest of the world with a very colonial lens, to be honest with you. I think we've, and I'm in global health and I've worked in this space for 30 years now. And the way we engage with global problems, we viewed it from our own lens. I think a little bit of an empathy, a little bit of understanding of others, other countries, and we're doing this with India now, and I think we are starting to do this with Africa and other countries. I think that's important because it helps you be far more self-aware. Self-awareness is critical for us as a nation. Knowing what our challenges are, the challenges that you talked about, Vibhuti Ji, you're right. I mean, those are real challenges, but they're not unsurmountable. Yes. They're addressable. We just have to acknowledge that those exist. We have to acknowledge that we have brought those about ourselves. And then we have to have a true discussion, frank discussion that is focused more on the solution rather than on just figuring out, who caused the problem. I think we all cause the problem.
We all cause the problem. Yes, you are totally right. Some by overindulging, some by their emotional truths, and some by keeping quiet and not speaking out. So both of you are absolutely correct. And I believe in that. That's why I'm having this dialogue with you, because this is part of our culture, part of our Hindu culture. Dialogue, debate, discussion, discourse. It is very essential. As Nathan may not follow those 5 Hindi words, but I always say Vichar, Vimarsh, Vishleshan, Vimochan, and Vikhyan. You follow that, Nathan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So these 5 Vichar, Vimarsh, Vishleshan, Vimochan, and Vikhyan, we have to have in our community. That is democracy all about. My way and highway is the root cause of problem. And that's what brings me to a very interesting news that came about. I want to verify the authenticity. That Secretary Blinken, I believe, a few days ago talked about in John Hopkins and others that America will have to admit and admire and accept the changing world. How tough will it be for America to adjust to the changing world, Nathan?
So I think America's already in some ways doing it right now. I'll tell you a story. I was actually, before I did medicine, I actually was working on Capitol Hill. And this was around 2007, 2008, and I was an intern. I actually met then Senator Biden at the time. And the U.S.-India nuclear deal was actually in the works. It was in the process of both Senate and House negotiations, and in addition, was going through the external negotiations between Condoleezza Rice and I forget who the foreign minister was in India at the time. But I actually talked to Senator Biden at the time, and he actually let me into the Senate elevator, the senator's only elevator. And he even told me that his dream was in 25 years that the U.S. and India became the world's, two closest countries. So I can tell you from that experience, I think some of the developments we're seeing the last year, I think in some ways has, his thinking has been shaped from the U.S.-India nuclear deal. I want to point out that the U.S.-India nuclear deal, we think of it as a fait accompli, that it was destined to happen. We also forget the rancor behind it. The non-proliferation lobby in the U.S. was very, very vocal and against it. And especially the non-proliferation lobby was the Democrats were in the hawk to it. So Senator Biden was actually the first Democrat to break ranks with the non-proliferation lobby. So, I think that's one thing. I think, the reason why the U.S. realizes it has to adapt is we talked about American decline. I think it's important to note that it's a relative decline. It's not so much America declining in absolute terms. It's the rise of the rest. It's China lifting over, 250 million people out of poverty, actually probably more than that. India doing something similar, right? The tallest building in the world is in the UAE. You're seeing the center of gravity shift towards the east. So as a result, you're going to see the balance of power shift, and the U.S. is going to adapt. At the same time, is it able to? I mean, I think it has. I mean, just look during the 70s when you had détente, you had arms control agreements. It was the U.S. trying to find a way to drive a wedge into, between China, then Maoist China, and the Soviet Union. So the U.S. has learned to accommodate other powers. And I think that as a result, now India is a rising power. The U.S. is trying to accommodate that and create a geopolitical balance of power that is more conducive to India's interests.
I think that was a brilliant point you made here about it's not actually a decline, it is the rise of the others. And very, very appropriate, because people like us have played a role in the rise of India, since 1991. And it gives me tremendous sense of pride that, yes, India has moved forward. Having said that, Dr. Mairal, I will come to you with one inevitable question that Nathan said that he traveled with senators only elevator, and he heard Senator Biden say what he said. Today, Senator Biden is President Biden. And President Biden, who is not in his minds, literally speaking, as of now, from whatever we have seen, how do you think, is he responsible for the perception of decline that America is looking at?
That's a tough question. And by the way, there was Pranab Mukherjee, who was the external affairs minister in India, who went on to become president himself. So, so a very interesting trajectory of these leaders on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the ocean. So is President Biden emblematic of America's decline? I don't know. I actually think he's been very savvy. I've been really impressed by, despite what my misgivings were about democratic politics, I'm very progressive in social terms, fiscally conservative. And I do worry about some of the policies, some of the platforms that Democratic Party pursues. And I was worried that President Biden might follow some of the things that President Obama did. President Obama tried to balance and try to moralize, and didn't really understand the shifting world that Dr. Punwani just talked about. I see a lot more realpolitik sort of perspective coming from Biden administration. And I would assume that, it has the imprimatur of the president himself. So I think that's a good sign. That's a very good sign, in my opinion. that we have such an open-minded, willing to accept the role of others, approach that's coming from the U.S. And I think it may some that are very jingoistic about American nationalism might say, this is a decline of the America of the U.S. And I don't think it's a decline of the U.S. It's just moving on with the times, adapting to the world, and maintaining a form of leadership that's needed for these times. And I think that America is being fairly responsible, at least what I've seen last couple of years, and especially in the way it's engaging with the US, with India, and with Africa right now, and China. Actually, to be honest with you, I think the approach that's taken with China is, I think it took some time to really recognize the risk it represents to the world order, to the US, and finally they've come to that.
Thank you. I definitely applaud Mr. Biden for one thing for sure. He has been consistent reference India.
Yeah.
That is something which I applaud him for. Though policy-wise for America, I do not know. But why has he messed up? What is his game plan with immigration? Failure, I would put it that way. One doesn't get it, other than the fact that you want to turn some red states into blue states. That's the game plan. But now coming to the last question of the day, you wanted to say something, Nathan?
One quick point. I think another some credit that has to also be given is not just President Biden, but also Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, especially Sullivan. Sullivan has been very close to Ajit Doval, and a lot of for example, the drone deal, the MQ-9B Reaper drone deal, the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited GE jet engine deal. This was spearheaded by the dialogue between Sullivan and Ajit Doval. And then the other one I would add is Gina Raimondo, who's the Commerce Secretary. She has Piyush Goyal, the industry minister in India, his cell phone. They're very close. And I see a natural partnership when it comes to, Prime Minister Modi's production-linked incentives and talk in America about supply chain resiliency. There's a clear convergence of economic interests. And I think you see some very tight partnerships forming on a mid-level, cabinet-level basis between India and the U.S.
I echo that as well. I 100% agree with all those three names, Dr. Punwani. That's
brilliant.
Spot on. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, that's very correct. Today, both of you are, one of you is a professor deeply involved in global health. Dr. Nathan Punwani is an actual physician, both of you. But there is one question that has cropped up in my mind that I wanted to talk about, that the opioid crisis and fentanyl crisis it's amazing. It is so saddening to see the data that most of the opioid-related deaths that have happened in America are in middle-class families and above, exacerbated by fentanyl crisis. What's happening about that? Why is it that America is so systematically failing in its war on drugs? That's my last question of the day. Either one of you, this is addressed to both of you, so whoever wants to go on this first.
I mean, it's the new Opium Wars, right? you have subsidized opiates from China that are getting trafficked through Latin America into the U.S. And when you have like I say, some relative economic decline, so you have some areas of the country that are underperforming. So think kind of a lot of the Rust Belt. And then on top of that, you have for a while, the drug companies, the industry was pushing doctors to prescribe opiates. So it was just a confluence of factors that at some point was going to set us up for a very explosive fire, right? A conflagration. And I think personally, this is my personal philosophy. I think the war on drugs has failed. I think we need to view drugs as a public health problem and address it kind of more sensibly. I mean, I can tell you just, for example, cocaine, and I go to Latin America pretty frequently. Literally, we might get reduction in cocaine yields in Colombia. They grow the country over into Venezuela, or they'll grow in Peru. It sort of shifts the goalposts around, but it doesn't really actually solve the problem. So, I mean, I think personally, we're going to need I think better policy and treating drugs more as a public health problem rather than crime. And I think that if you look at it, these syndicates, these cartels, you would bankrupt them if drugs were decriminalized.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Dr. Mairal?
Yeah, so this is a huge topic and probably could take
Yes.
2 more shows. Healthcare in the US is broken. And I agree with Dr. Punwani that war on drugs has failed. I've
Failed,
tracked
yes.
it for the last 30 years. I think we do need to treat this as a public health challenge, and communication, awareness, policy moves, public health policy moves are needed. But most importantly, what's needed is political will. I think that's what we don't have. We don't have political will. And that has really come in the way of solving this. Initially, we approached this crisis with a more of war on drugs mindset. We didn't really approach it as a public health crisis. We are starting to do that now, but I don't see all the policymakers really coming on it. We are still scratching at the surface of this problem. There's a lot more behind the fentanyl crisis than the fentanyl crisis itself.
Wow. It is sometimes it baffles me because I belong to the world where we find solutions to a problem.
Yeah.
To give you one simple example, my opinion, and I may be wrong about that, correct me if you like. Smoking, for example. We all know that smoking causes cancer and whatever the consequences, whether health related, everything we know. We increase the price of cigarette through taxation, right? So I see this, I observe these things. What is happening is that suddenly a packet of cigarette, which was $4, is now $15. But nobody is doing anything about production of tobacco. Nobody is doing anything about the production of cocaine-related item, opium-related item. We have gone to the moon, we are traveling to the Mars, and we can't change the agriculture growth pattern, product patterns on the Mother Earth. That's a rhetorical statement that I'm making here, not demanding you to reply to that. But that's my thought, that if we chose to address the problem for what it is, you have a solution. I totally subscribe to Einstein's philosophy. Any intelligent fool can complicate a simple problem. It takes courage to move in the other direction. So it's time for us to move in the other direction. I think that's where Vivek Ramaswamy is now shining out and appealing to a cross-section of people, because I'm observing it. His videos, his podcasts, I see the comments of people. I don't look at the conversation, I see the comments of people. And people from all walks, all kinds, are saying this guy is telling the truth. Whether the establishment or the swamp will let him win or not, I do not know. But I agree with you guys that America is not in decline, but probably America is at crossroads, and that it needs to address this issue. And thank you very much for joining us today, both Dr. Mairal and Dr. Punwani. It is such a pleasure to have you listen to your thoughts, and I hope the viewers will enjoy as much. So as I always say, Satyamev Jayate, truth must triumph. And incidentally, Vivek has the same truth as his campaign call. Thank you very much. Viewers, please like, subscribe, and support our channel, and we will bring you conversations as wonderful and as deep as we had today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.